Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Giving the Game Away. And today, Ian and I are going to talk about the mechanics of monetizing action games. What do you have for us today? And
you treat me like I'm some sort of magician with a bag of tricks now.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see what you have. It's a topic that I'm not, necessarily an expert in. So looking forward to see what angle you're taking.
Okay. Well, action games are really fascinating for a few reasons. On Steam, which is not what we're going to talk about today, but on Steam, action games have the highest probability of becoming a hit as a genre. PC players love action games. Console players love action games. On mobile, they're actually slightly underrepresented because there's so much crossover with other genres. There's a lot of crossover with, there's like action, hypercasual, action, strategy, action, battle royale. And we're sort of covering a lot of those genres today. There's a huge amount of them. I'm a big fan of them. But what's really interesting is the psychology of people who play these action games. They actually have a really unique profile in the mobile gaming space because they're actually kind of like hyper-casual players. They have relatively low, the action games have relatively low retention compared to other genres. Actually slightly lower than hyper-casual from what I remember. And their session times are quite short as well. They're actually, again, slightly shorter than hyper-casual. And very interestingly, stress relief is, again, a big reason that these people are playing action games. So off the bat, what kind of gamer are you getting an impression of, Sam? What's this person going to be looking for in a game?
Yeah, that's the question. Can you give us some examples of like action games just so we can frame that?
Yeah, so I think one of the most popular ones on the Play Store right now is actually called Toss the Turtle, which is where you launch the turtle long distances. I think a better example might be like Call of Duty Mobile. That's a good example of an action game. Yeah. Very high pace, very fast. Yeah, something along those lines. Something where you're very much in the action, where it's reaction speed focused, where it's quick decision making, where it's very skill based.
Yeah, that's it. I think there's certainly more skills than traditional hyper casual, which is a lot simpler. So I guess that would be the difference in the player motivation. People are looking for to apply those skills, and that's how they get satisfaction is by beating a level or beating someone, going up a level, and so on. So I think there's a bit more achievement to it. And generally, when that's the case, the session times would also be somewhat longer. So yeah, I guess it depends on how what games you're looking at, because action can be pretty more can be more hardcore, or it can be more casual within the same category, right? So
so I wanted to focus mainly on like the more casual action in this one, because it follows on really nicely from our hyper casual conversation last week. The casual action players, they're not necessarily new to gaming in the same way hyper casual players are. They're not necessarily trying to fill time the same way as people coming away from social media are. These players are they're engaged with gaming. They're really interested in it, but they're almost impatient in that. Like they just want to get the next hit of adrenaline, the next hit of dopamine. They want to keep learning new skills. They want to progress to the next level, and they flip-flop between games because of that. So similar to hyper-casual, we'll talk about hyper-casual business model actually, because they share it quite similarly. But similar to hyper-casual, action game developers kind of want to keep these players within action games. They want to move them between them to keep the money going, essentially. It would be great if you could talk about the business model of hyper-casual, because that's great background for what we're talking about now.
Yeah, it's quite simple. I mean, hyper casual, you know, they attract casual players who are not interested in paying for the game or paying for anything really. So the business model relies 95% on advertising, showing, you know, interstitial ads. Generally, after every single level, which are 20 to 30 seconds, you have this interruption. Then you move on to the next level, and that's how they're monetizing. And they have to stack a pretty important amount of those ads interruptions to be able to turn out profit on users who are generally bought through user acquisition. Now we've talked many times about what is the future of that genre to, you know, leverage their huge user base. I mean, Voodoo again was announced at the top publisher this year in terms of number of downloads by far. But in terms of revenue, you know, they're very far off a King or a Supercell, because each user doesn't generate that much money. They're transiting through that platform, just seeing a few ads, probably not spending much time on the game. So they have a retention problem by design. And one of the ways that this could evolve is creating more metagame, more exciting things happening in the game to retain those users longer. That's one of the paths. And I think if we're talking about action games, there is certainly more going on. There's more of a story generally around it. It's not just, you know, one level after the other. And there's also that rate of progression where things probably become a bit harder. You know, it's just harder to get to the next level or harder to kill the enemy and so on. And so it attracts people who are motivated by the challenge, not just people who want to do that for, you know, spending a few minutes here and there.
Exactly. And I have this theory that because these people are motivated so much by the action, the speed of it, advertising actually hits them even harder than hyper-casual players. Because intrusive advertising, it feels more intrusive when all you're there for is the next hit of adrenaline. That waiting those 30 seconds is a huge pain. And that would sort of explain the challenges with retention and session time and all these things. So I wanted to talk about today about how you might design a game for an action player and how that influences the monetization of that game. So something that I find really fascinating, and I talk about it a lot, is this idea of a flow state. A flow state is very cool. It's a theory I've spoken about briefly before, created by a psychologist whose name that I really can't pronounce.
Can you please remind me the name of this?
Oh gosh, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Right, that's the one.
It's just embarrassing. But it's a really good, like, it's something that I think everyone experiences. So flow is like when you're so engrossed in something that you're skilled at that time just sort of melts away. You don't think about it. It's characterized as this perfect balance between it's the middle ground between like boredom and anxiety. It's when your skill is perfectly matched to the difficulty of the task that you're doing. And it's fantastic. I think everyone's experienced it at some point in their lives. I've experienced it with Tetris. I have great fond memories of flow in Tetris. Do you have a flow state that you are fond of?
I mean, I think it applies to everything, not only games, right? Like in life as well, as you know, do more complicated things. Or I mean, I studied science, so of course every year it becomes harder, but you also have more skills. And so as long as this is balanced, you know, it's really enjoyable because it's not boring. You're learning something new, but at the same time, you're still able to complete what you need to complete, so you're not overwhelmed. So yeah, I think you can find that as, you know, many aspects of your life. And yeah, that's it's certainly more than a theory, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And that exactly what you said, that that seeking that sort of balance is exactly what action games are doing. They want to be in that state. They love it more than most other gamers out there. Like Tetris puzzle players have a similar thing, but very different motivations about stress relief and action and all this stuff.
Well, hyper casual probably definitely like lay on the side of the boredom, right? This is why it doesn't really get harder over time. It's you know, you pick up level 300 or level 1, it's roughly the same. And then the hardcore games, clearly on the anxiety side. I don't know if anxiety is the right word here. It's more like it's too difficult, right? So you give up because it's too difficult, especially if you're not willing to invest the time. And that's actually how I react to most hardcore games. It's just there's just so much to do. You know that you could get it, you could do it, but you would need to spend a week to like master it. And so yeah, it's a big drop off for casual players. So certainly.
Yeah, I lean more towards playing games for the challenge of it, for that flow state. I like this, chasing that thrill of accomplishment in a game, and I'm willing to put the hours in to do that. And these action games are similar. Often an issue you face is that the difficulty curve of the game starts out way too hard, or not hard enough, so they don't immediately enter that flow state. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So there are 4 major design needs in an action game to really push retention and session time further. And these are just core gameplay, but they all influence monetization. So the first one is that the task, the game, needs concrete goals with manageable rules. If you're introducing too many rules at once, you're making your player think too much. If the single task you've given them is unmanageable, like spinning a bunch of plates at once, it's going to be set out too hard. It's a tricky balance immediately, but you've got to be aware of how much you're trying to teach at once. Cognitive load. You can't make them think about too many things at once, because they'll just shut down. They're not in it for that. Equally, if you're throwing too many ads at a person and you're sending hundreds of different signals, they're going to switch off as well. It's just too much cognitive load. So the second goal is that goals must fit within the person's capabilities, which is exactly what we were talking about before. This is the difficulty curve. They're chasing something that's perfectly matched to their skill level. David Strachan has spoken about a difficulty saw before, where the difficulty curve goes up and then it drops a bit, because as you introduce a new thing, you've got to start it out easier, then it goes up and drops a bit. Very good system. Again, matching it to their ability is 100% the most important thing. I know I'm just ranting here, I'm just spinning through these 4 things. So the third thing is all about feedback on performance and letting a player know that they've accomplished something. This is a big thing for general monetization in terms of in-app purchases and stuff. You want to associate buying something with feeling good. Equally, in action games, you want to associate just playing the game with accomplishing something. You want to signal that. You want to give them pop-ups and noises, make it feel nice. Unfortunately, action games, like pure casual action games, don't work very well with in-app purchases because of the low retention. So really, you've got to celebrate their gameplay, their ability before motivating them to buy something. But the last one, and this is the biggest one in terms of monetization, is that distractions must be minimized to increase focus, because flow is all about focus. These players, these action game players, are all about focus. And like being interrupted by a 30-second interstitial is a great way to break a person's focus. We were talking about, this is very similar to our conversation last week about hypercasual, but it's even more powerful for action games. Like keeping ads non-intrusive is a way to keep the players in the game. And yeah, I don't know, it's even more obvious in action games because the game is what they're there for. Yeah.
And probably the state of flow is when you get out of it, it's not instant to come back in, right? So it's like, I think there was this study made that every time you're working on something and your coworker asks you to do something and you just replies with a single sentence, it's like, was it something like 16 minutes, 26 minutes to get back into it, just because you get distracted and then where was I on my spreadsheet? And then, oh, I forgot about this. And it's the same here, right? It's the harder the game, the more complex the game is, the longer it would take you to get back into the flow state. And if you don't get back to the flow state, then you might go on the side of anxiety, because suddenly I forgot which is the command, what do I need to do? And so certainly those interruptions are not helping the gameplay. I mean, it's not rocket science what we're saying here. It's obvious. Every player knows that ads are not helping the gameplay, but it's a nice way to deconstruct the psychology behind it.
Yeah, my pet theory is actually about the fact that these players are being broken out of their flow state that's making them churn and convert to a different game. Because as soon as you when you break out of flow, it's hard to get back into it, and that's a really negative feeling. It feels like you've gone back to step zero, and then you're suddenly associating that game with negative feelings, and it becomes this horrible hellish cycle of you just feeling bad about what you're doing. Whereas non-intrusive advertising, I think, could be a great solution, a great alternate business model to the ad-heavy approach that's currently in place. Because with like in-play, which is obviously we're biased towards, but it's a great example. You can probably show a lot more of those ads per session than annoying interstitials, because they don't break a player out of flow state. They're a part of the gameplay.
Yeah,
really protecting flow is what I care about in this.
Absolutely.
Category.
Because the flow would lead to the retention on the game, right? If you start losing people, that's the number one reason why they would leave, is because of the ads. And I think we discussed about that recently. It's not necessarily because they're actually pissed off about the ads and say, oh, there's too many ads, I'm going to leave. But the interruption that the ads create just gives them, their brain switches off, the game is finished, and that's basically where they would drop off. Even if they're not annoyed about the ad specifically, it gives them these breaks in the experience that would lead them to drop off. Exactly. And so, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, we used to have big pop-ups on top of articles, right? In early 2000, there was like actual windows that were opening, and then you close your browser and you still have like 15 pop-ups for like casinos and stuff. We don't do that anymore. The ads are kind of like on the side of the article, or sometimes in read or in view. So like as you scroll, you also discover the ad. And then Facebook also started with ads on the right-hand side and had the feed more integrated. So why is the gaming world lagging behind and have these ads that are slapped on top of it and that totally interrupt the experience? It's kind of a no-brainer. We've been talking about this for a long time. It really is. And but it's good just to show that there's, it's not just putting ads in games. There's tangible benefits for the publishers to do that. They would get more users. Users would not be annoyed. They would have better store reviews as well. So all in all, it's it's something that will come for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I really like relating the benefits of non-intrusive advertising to people's psychology, because all of these different game categories, like action, like hypercasual, the people playing them and doing it for different needs, different motivational needs. We've spoken about that in the past as well. We had a whole podcast about motivation. And as soon as a game isn't meeting those motivations, then it stops working. The great thing about non-intrusive ads is that it tends to meet everyone's motivations in slightly different ways. For action gamers, it keeps them in the flow state. For hypercasual, it stops them getting bored, which is what they're trying to escape in the first place. I find it fascinating. It's a very unique profile, action games.
What sports game, for example, racing games? I know it's out of action. It's not action on the App Store, but would you say that the motivations there are the same, or would you put it into different buckets?
I think it's definitely really, really similar. I think with action and sports games, you also have this layer of fandom, which is a whole other psychological element going on. Like people playing football games are the same people, have a similar mentality to people just playing different chess games, because the rules are the same across for the most part. You're doing it because you love the thing. And once you start being taken out of the thing that you love and being taken out of the flow state on top of that, you're going to get a similar amount of churn. Yes, a very similar profile psychologically, but with an added level of like obsession. I don't know if sports people would like me comparing them to chess fans. Is that bad?
I mean, chess is a sport, I guess.
Well, there's chess boxing as well, which is even more. I haven't seen a game about that yet. Yeah. I'd love to
That's
see an action game, a study on action games using non-intrusive ads and see how that affects retention time. It's probably something we'll do one day.
Well, we've been working on a case study actually on that, showing that it didn't affect the retention at all, which is great. No matter how many ads you put within a certain limit, of course. But if you do that properly, whether you have 5 or 10, there's no relationship between the retention and that. And that's obvious, because what people hate are the interruptions. Like we've talked about that. It's what triggers that change of flow. Exactly. So yeah, keeping your users in flow is absolutely. I think that can apply to pretty much every type of game. Some games might have narrower flows than others.
Yeah.
I think the wider you keep it, probably the more people you can engage.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that should be the lesson from this entire podcast. Keep your players in flow. Think about that while monetizing it. And that is all I have for you on my magic hat today, Sam.
Nice. I guess to finish off, it would be interesting to see like how do you design for that, right? Because it's hard to know exactly what people are expecting. You can do all kinds of research. How do you level up the difficulty of the levels? I know that a lot of studios now do that live, like there's live ops, so they can adjust that as they go instead of republishing apps. Is there anything that you can share on that? Like how would you go about that?
Well, I'm a big fan of like rapid iteration, but just rapidly prototyping stuff and developing as you go. Obviously, you need a base of players, of testers to do that with, which you can find online quite easily, or you can bring in friends and family if you've got people in that target audience. But there are, like, in terms of designing for difficulty, there's age-old methods for it. Like this is something that has been in designers' minds since the dawn of gaming, basically. We've spoken before about player taste and what brings people into a game. Having that mentality of understanding your end user, understanding who you want to be playing the game, and looking at games that have been made for that player already is a great way of doing it. Deconstruct what other people have done, understand their flow, understand when they introduce new gameplay mechanics. That's a really fascinating side of things, and I could talk about the design side for another 20 minutes. But look
engineering
at the
flow.
Look at the masters. Yeah, exactly. That might be my flow.
The key.
Yeah.
Nice.
Look at the masters. Test.
Measure and test. Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ian. And thanks everyone for following. And I'll see you next week in the next episode.
Thank you very much.